I normally like to avoid autobiographical details in my sermons because I want everybody to focus mostly, exclusively, shall I say, on the Word of God. But unfortunately, there are times when throughout the week, throughout our lives, the gospel intermingles so closely in our lives that we cannot separate them, and certain lessons just have to be spoken about regardless of the biographical content, shall I say. Now, this week I was kind of doing my usual sort of thing and happened to be curious about something in C.S. Lewis, the Screwtape Letters, which of course led me to be curious about something else. And eventually, through my thought process, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be neat if I could find an animated version or a version of a show on this or something? So I went and I did my Google search and searched Amazon and stuff. And I couldn't find a single animated show on it or anything like that. And I thought, well, that's disappointing. But I did find a radio theatrical broadcast done in England that featured Andy Serkis. Now, Andy Serkis is the actor who played Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, so I'm thinking to myself, this is a good thing. He's a good actor. He's playing Screwtape. If ever there was an actor to play Screwtape, it's definitely this man. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to get this. Well, it's not on Amazon Music. It's not available for any sort of digital download. And most of my music, little bit I have converted to digital. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, they have the CD version. No problem. I have no problem with that. So click, bye-bye, one-step click. And it's shipping to me. And the next day, of course, I get that little from Amazon that says your package will arrive on such and such a day. And I'm just ecstatic because I'm going to hear this, and I'm really excited to listen to this radio broadcast. And then the voice of common sense, or as I like to call it, the voice of my mother, because it sounds like my mother to me. Sounds exactly like her voice whenever I hear it, says, and you are going to play this how? I hadn't thought of that. I don't have a CD player anymore. So I'm thinking to myself, no problem. Walmart's probably got something back in the cheap section. I'll pick myself up a $19, $20 little, even if it's a portable one, don't care. Doesn't exist anymore. Everything's $100 if you want a CD player. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I have a DVD player which can play CDs. Limits me to listening to it in the living room, but it still will work. And then, again, the voice of my mother says, why don't you just hook up your wireless earphones to your TV? So my mother wins again yet again. So as I'm listening to it, I get to the part where Screwtape is talking about how people view time and how God views time. Now, this is often a tricky subject for just about anybody. Because what I've discovered in talking to people over the years is we all kind of have our own concept of eternity. And once that concept becomes embedded within us, it can be difficult to converse about that. It can almost become controversial to some people when we're talking about the matter of time, especially say if I'm talking to a Calvinist or somebody of that sort of persuasion, certain Protestant groups who have that certain, shall I say, predestination theory in their minds also. So it can be a little tricky. Now, I've never found a perfect way to view eternity or to view time or to even contemplate on that. In fact, one time as a kid, probably somewhere between Thomas and Charles' age, so I was maybe around 10 or 11, I started thinking to myself, what about eternity? What about a life that never ends? What about a day that never ends? What about a world that never ends? And I made myself literally, physically ill because my mind started to spin, and I guess I was having a panic attack trying to think about it. So I made up my mind to never think about eternity again, which is a good thing to say, but not so easy to put into practice because the older we get, the more we start to dwell on that. And it was fortunately that I read the works of St. Anthony, and he was contemplating something truly grand at one point too. And he's like, how can this be, God? How can this be? And a voice from heaven came unto him and said, Anthony, worry about the things that are Anthony's, and let God worry about the things that are God's. And that was always been my kind of approach to time. That doesn't mean I haven't found little examples that have helped me. And C.S. Lewis is in the Screwtape Letter, when Screwtape is explaining the concept of time to his nephew, an under secretary or a junior tempter, I should say appropriately. He's kind of explaining how God views time, how he experiences time, how the spiritual world experiences time, how people experience time. And it's just an example, so if it doesn't quite work for you, don't dwell on it too much. I'm merely using this to kind of set the main discussion of today. He kind of says that they tempt people by getting them to look at the future, because the future is of all things the least like eternity. Now, people experience eternity because it's always now. We always have a now. There's always a today. There is a touch of eternity even in our lives, which progress from yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and that we always live in the eternal now. So we have a little bit of an experience with it. It's not an overwhelming one, because unless you really stop and think about it, you don't think about it. It's just now. You just do the things you do now, and you keep on doing the things you do now until then becomes now, or now becomes later, or yesterday, whatever it was. We all live in eternity. So the past we see is frozen because we have the past. So it's of limited use to tempt people in Screwtape's way of thinking, because it's frozen, and even that sometimes certain people are suffering a tremendous loss in their life may dwell on the past, or scholars may get caught up in the ancient, or sometimes even ourselves, the good old days, and we want to constantly reminisce on that. We know that those have gone, and those cannot come back, and that we have to be moving in the now and working towards the future. But everything seems to point to the future, so by keeping the future hazy, shadowy, and if we focus too much time on it, we start to neglect the duties of the now. That's Screwtape's whole theory on how to tempt people by the use of time. But again, this week, not immune to social media as much as I don't particularly care for it. I'm not immune to the YouTube or Google. We all use it. I try and use it more as a tool than as a way of experiencing any sort of real life or anything. But I watch the certain clips on YouTube, and I'm watching debates, and I read the news on the internet and things like that. And recently, of course, as we all know, Queen Elizabeth passed away. And of course, the people on The View, one of them had to make a comment. It's a terrible thing she passed away. And then they had to bring up that which is the great debate in America, all the bad things that have been done in the past by a certain group of people. I'm not going to go into too much detail. But she, of course, says about the monarchy doing that. And I'm listening to the Screwtape Letters, and I'm reading this article. And I'm going back and forth. I'm thinking to myself, it's a little sneaky that the devil even now will use the past to attack us. Because he's happy to do that. He's sitting there saying, look at the past. Fight over the past. The past that was past, we can now still keep it present if we keep arguing about it, if we keep focusing on it, if we keep debating on it. And as I mentioned, I've watched the clips. I watched Jordan B. Peterson and Matt Walsh and most of the conservative ones. But I also try and find myself some liberal ones. I want to have both sides of the discussion. I want to have a well-rounded argument. I want to look at both sides and consider it. And I go to Jon Stewart, a person I normally trust. He's a comedian, but he normally has some fair points along with his comedy. And he was talking about that same thing. And I thought to myself, he goes through all this, but he doesn't tell us how we can fix it, because it's in the past. All we can do is lament it and use it as a point of contention between the people of now, if we use that approach. But if you truly want the Christian way to teach about it, then what we need to be doing is turning to our kids and to other people and saying, yeah, it was a terrible thing. What can we learn from it? What can we make use of it? What can we do so that it doesn't happen again? We can take our kids aside and show them, look, you think that because you do something today, it'll be forgotten tomorrow, or it's not going to affect somebody in the future? We're still fighting about things that happened hundreds, maybe thousands of years ago. See how these things, and what is mankind but the big overall picture of humans interacting with other humans? Look at how this sort of treatment has led to problems even today, hundreds of years later. Look at how your actions can affect Maybe not on this great a scale, but how it can affect your friends, your family, your very life. The choices you will have in the future. The choices you will have now. See how you can hurt another person, and that hurt can last forever. And again, to go back to C.S. Lewis, he made a very similar point. In the movie, The Most Reluctant Convert, a very well done movie, and I recommend it to everybody, the character played by Max Elan says that as C.S. Lewis, he says, I've never had an experience with a normal mortal, with an ordinary mortal human being. He says we're all destined for immortality. All our interactions are with immortal people. And that's how we should be looking at it. That our actions can have an everlasting effect on a person's soul, for the good or the bad. And we could at one point, if we were to meet that person after they had gone to their judgment and they have been glorified, that person that we think so little of may be a being that we would be tempted to fall down on our face in front of and worship, and have to be reminded worship belongs to God only. Or they might become a demon so horrible that we would have never thought is possible in our worst nightmares. All our interactions with people have lasting effects. This is the lesson we need to be teaching our kids. This is the lesson we need to be learning as a society. Not sitting there arguing over a frozen past, but how can we make sure that we understand that what we do will have a lasting effect on other people. God says, love your neighbor as yourself for just that reason. Not the grand scheme, the neighbor, the person you see every day. He is calling your attention to the home, to the people that you will interact with constantly. And he says, love your neighbor, because what you do will forever have an impact on them and you. Here is the lesson we need to be learning. Not fighting over what we can do to erase a past that is not possible. But how can we teach our children? How can we move forward? This is the best way. By reminding them that we are all immortal beings. And how we interact with each other will count not only today, but in the everlasting now of God's presence. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father,